So in the previous tutorial, you saw how I used json.stringify function to do something. So now I need to explain how JSON works. So to begin with, the definition of JSON is JavaScript object notation. So JSON was designed specifically for JavaScript to convert an object into a string and back from a string into an object. So this is all that JSON is about. So what is an object? Now, an object in JavaScript is simply like an array of information in other languages. So this is like a bookshelf where you have sections where you store information. So for example, if I say variable, or object, let me just say my object is equal to like this. So once I do this, I'm telling JavaScript that I want to create an array of information. I want to store multiple kinds of data in this same variable, right? Maybe I want to store the name, the age, and the gender of someone. Instead of having separate individual variables, I could simply use this same variable, okay, which I can name something like person is equal to something like this. So once I do this, I'm telling it that this will be an empty object. Then later on, I can actually add some things to this object. For example, I can say person dot name is equal to, and then I say John, something like this. So I'm creating a location in this object called name, and then I'm assigning John to it. So I can do something else. I can say dot age, for example, and instead of using quotes there, I can simply add a number like so. So already this is an object, and I've added two things in this object, the age and the name. So as you can see, it's very convenient to do this kind of thing, because instead of having multiple variables that contain this data that is related, I can simply have one object that contains all that data. So we can use a console.log to see what's inside. I can say console.log person. So this is going to tell us what person is. If I go to my browser and go there, refresh, as soon as I refresh and go to the console, because I've told it to log that, it will show me that this is person is an object, and it has two things in here. There's name and there's John. Okay. Oh, there's name and there's age here. So you have to pay attention to how this format is shown here, because this comes in handy later on. All right, so now we see what the object is. And to access the information still, I can go and say person.age here, console.log person.age, then I'll get back the information that I added here. So let me come back here and refresh, and you see there's a 24 there, which is very correct. So this is a very convenient way to store information and get it back, information that's related. Now, instead of doing it like this, what I could do is I could, right here when declaring the person, I could go down here like this. Actually, you don't have to do it like this. You can say name full colon like that and say John, and then you put a comma and say age full colon 24, and then put another comma and say gender full colon male, something like this. So I'm declaring an object like this and giving it a few values. So if I then echo this to the console, let me refresh that, you will see that it shows me all the information in there as predicted. All right. Now, you don't have to show it like this. For readability purposes, you can do it like this and it will still work just fine, because like this, it's more clear what you're actually doing when reading back your code. Just make sure that you don't forget the commas at the end of another item, because if you just put another item like this, you're going to get an error. Let me try that. So you'll see a syntax error. There's a missing comma after a property, like so. Okay, so that's about objects. So objects are useful, as you have seen. In JavaScript, there are no associative arrays like in other languages, so you can't have an array where the memory location is, for example, name and age and a word like this. Normally, you only have arrays where the location 1 is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. But even those internally are actually objects in JavaScript. It's just that they look like arrays to you, but JavaScript just deals with objects. This is why it's very convenient to use objects when dealing with JavaScript. Now the problem comes in when we want to get this object and transfer it over the internet to the server. Now, even if the server is using JavaScript as well, it's very difficult to just get this thing and send it over as it is. What we have to do is convert it to a string and then send it over the internet as a text. And then when it gets to the other side, we convert it back into an object for use. Now, in order to convert this thing into a string, we use the JSON. So we're going to say json.stringify. That's the function we need. And then I'm going to stringify the person. So what I'm telling it is that convert this into a string. Convert this object into a string. So I'm going to say var myString is equal to, and then now I can console.log the string itself so that you see what it is converted to. So when I refresh now, you will see that it shows me a string. Now this string is convenient because I can send it to the server and then convert it to an array or an object on the server and use it again. So this is all that JSON is. It's just conversion from an object to a string and back from a string to an object. So now that I have this string, if I want to convert it back into an object, all I need to do is come back here. Let me just say var my object is equal to, I do the same thing again, json.parse this time, like so, and then I can get the string and put it in there. And then I can now get my object and console.log that one so that we see what it tells us. If I refresh now, you see that it's back to an object with all this data, and I can access the individual parts of this object once more. All right, so well and good. So now let me cancel this. So this is all you need to know about JSON in JavaScript. Now, since we have it set up this way that whatever we get from the server is alerted to us, so we'll see an alert every time we get something back from this file. So let's go to the PHP side. So since we are using two different languages, this is PHP, we need to know how to handle the string that comes from the JavaScript in form of JSON data. So here we are capturing the data first of all. Now the reason we're using PHP input and not post or get variables like this like we normally do is because this data is not formatted in this way. If you want to use post or get, you would have to format your data down here before sending it. This should happen in between these two parts, like right here. You can format your data, but I don't want to make this more complicated, so that's why I didn't want to format it that way. So when we come here, we want to use our post or get variables. We are simply going to use file get contents, and we will get it from the PHP input. So the only thing we are getting here is the data that was sent as a string in JSON format. Okay, so if you remember very well, the JSON format is very simple. It's just name and value associations, right? So once we get the data, what we do is we say data is equal to JSON decode. Now JSON decode is equal to json.parse in JavaScript, right? So it's like this, JSON decode JSON, like so, is equal to the json.parse the other side in JavaScript. This is exactly the same, and on the other side we have JSON encode, which is equal to stringify. It's equal to the json.stringify in JavaScript. So these are the two equivalent functions for both PHP and JavaScript. So in here, this is why we're doing a JSON decode of the data, is because we want to create an object. So this becomes an object. So I'm simply going to say my object just to make it more obvious what's going on here. So let me copy this and put it down here like so. So now we have this object that's converted from a string. This was a string initially, and we create an object so that we can access our data. So let me comment these out since they're not valid syntax. So what I want to do now is, once I've created this object, I can simply access the data. Now to access the data from here, instead of doing what we were doing in there, saying my object.age or .gender, for example, what I would do in here is my object like this, and say instead of a dot we use an arrow like so, and that's it. So let me echo this and say echo, and then here I'm going to tell it to die so that we don't get to this part, and save that. So let's see if we're going to get the gender just by clicking down here, and there we go, we get male, which is correct. So which means everything actually went well. So this is how you access the information from the object. Now if you want to work with arrays in PHP and you don't like working with objects, it's very easy. When converting it here, you simply add true at the end like that, and this will be converted to an array instead of an object. So this will be invalid right now. So if I go back and try this again, you see that I will get an error because this is now an array. So to access this instead, you will have to do it the old-fashioned way like so. That's how you access arrays instead, and there we go, we get the same result. And if you want still, without this true here, you can simply convert your object into an array by simply putting the array keyword at the beginning like so, and then putting your variable again like so. So object is equal to the array of this object. So the same object converted to an array and assigned back to the same variable. This will still work as valid code, and you see it right there. And I can convert this back into an object by simply adding object here like so. So this is how you move between array and object very easily with minimum effort, and this will not be valid anymore. I'll have to use the arrow since now it's an object, and then do it again, and I'll see the same answer there. So this is how we get information from the server side, or from the client side to the server, and from the server to the client side with very little effort. So we'll be using objects throughout this. Even the data that we're going to read from the database will be in form of objects, so that everything is object oriented. That will make things easier to remember. Alright, so I'll see you in the next video where we do something practical with this knowledge.